I'm here with Melvin Robbins. We're at the Decatur County Historical Museum, and we're going to discuss with Melvin about his experiences as a veteran of World War II, his involvement in the D-Day invasion, June 6, 1944, and his later military experiences, as well as his concerns and situations after the end of the war. So Melvin, how about beginning with just some comments about your situation as you entered the service, your age and high school education, and what your disposition was at the time you started your military service?
Well, George, I was a senior in high school at Greensburg High School here in 1943, and so I got a letter from the government stating I was drafted into the service, and so I wanted to finish my high school and get a diploma, because otherwise I figured if I was in the service I'd never get a diploma. So I asked the draft board for a 6-month deferment, which they granted me, and so I went into the service sworn in at Fort Benjamin Harrison into the Army on August 12th, 1943, and so then after that, why they said, well, first I wanted to go into the Navy, and you probably remember Marion Marsh.
Yes, I know.
Well, him and I went to service together, and we sat on the bus and tried to figure out what we was going into service if we had a choice. He said, well, I'm going into the Marine Corps, and he said, Melvin, you go in with me. And I said, no, I'm going in the Navy, and I'm going to put you guys to shore. So, they asked him to, he asked him to be in the Marine Corps, so which they granted his wish. So when they came to me, they said, well, we got a Marine Corps, and we said we got the Navy and the Army. And I said, well, I'd like to go in the Navy. Well, so I took all the tests, passed all the tests except one, and that was the colorblind test. So the guy said, well, he said, we can't take you in the Navy because you're colorblind. I said, well, okay. So the guy, the Army man said, well, we'll take you because we don't consider that a problem in the Army. So he said, okay. So then Maryland finally came up and he said, well, he said, did they turn you down out of the Navy? I said, yeah. He said, good, you can go to the Marine Corps. I said, no. I said, I'm going in the Army. So I said, I'd like to go in the Air Force. And they said, no, we don't. We had the Air Force full. So I said, okay. Said, we have the Signal Corps, the Infantry, and the Medical Corps. I said, let's send me into the Medical Corps. I said, I can take care of people. So that's where I went. So I took my basic training at Camp Barkley, Texas. And I took all medical training while I was there. And then in December, we got our orders to move out in January. So we got our orders to move to go to Camp Reynolds, Pennsylvania. From there, they moved us to Camp Shanks, New York. From Camp Shanks, New York, we left there for Glasgow, Scotland. From Glasgow, Scotland, they moved us down to a central part in England, where we took all of our basic training for D-Day. We trained for 7 days a week. The only time we got off was for about an hour and a half on Sunday to go to our religious meetings or Mass, because I was with most Catholic boys, so we went to Mass over there. And we had Mass. We didn't have it in a building. We had it on the front of a Jeep on Sunday if the weather was good. And if the weather was bad, then it was held in the cafeteria over there, if we But you can't get so many men in the cafeteria, see.
Were these services pretty well attended?
Yes, they were.
But still voluntary?
Oh, yeah, still voluntary. Yeah, it wasn't compulsory.
But
we still did. Trained 7 days a week.
a lot of the boys decided that was the thing they wanted to do then.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So, all the time I was there in the States, never seen a rifle, never seen a Tommy gun, or what we call a BAR gun, or mortar, or nothing. We took all our medical training here in the States while we was here. But when we got overseas and got stationed, then they made us dig foxholes, they run tanks over us, and we done practice landings, beachhead landings, you name it, we done it.
You were actually in the infantry then?
Yeah, they give us all the infantry then, see. Because I said, well, why give us all that medical training? I said, why all this now? He said, if we need you to switch from being a medical man, we need you as a rifleman. So, but that's the reason why they give us all that. Says on crossing the channel, we were supposed to go in on June the 3rd, which was scheduled for D-Day. Well, the weather got so bad, and they postponed it to June the 6th. And we were supposed to went in on Beachhead Day on June the 3rd, but the weather's so bad and they postponed it. Because they, all the ships and everything in different ports and one thing and another. And so I left, it was Southampton is where I debarked on D-Day. And we hit the Utah beach on Normandy. And I hit the beach on about 4:30 in the evening. And at that time, our units hadn't advanced but much more than about 300 yards. You'd think early in the morning you'd advance more than 300 yards, but you didn't. So. And we had a lot of casualties.
You got there at 4:30 in the morning and the unit
No, 4:30
in the evening?
Yeah.
And the unit had only...
The other units had already been there at 5 o'clock in the morning, so ahead of us. When daylight come, they was hitting the beaches at, before daybreak. And so, but I didn't hit the beach until 4:30 that evening, because we was sitting out there in the channel and we had to wait for the other guys to get off the beach.
Were you on LSTs? Or?
Yeah, LSTs. And so, a lot of guys were seasick from being on the LST, sitting out there bobbing up and down like a cork on a pond. But we had a lot of flak going across. They was shooting everything at us, and that day I seen more airplanes than I ever seen in my whole life in the sky. And but after we hit the beaches, we still had at 4:30 in the afternoon, still had much, advanced much more than about 300 yards. And that was due to the fact we had a lot of flak and had a lot of casualties. And we stayed that way for several days. And the gaining ground was very slow. And you may gain probably 200 or 300 yards, and then you sat there for maybe 8 to 10 hours and you're not going no place.
And you were under fire the whole time?
You're under fire all the time. And then you're running from one place to another taking care of the wounded. That was my job. I was a medical technician, so my job was to take care of them.
Probably saw some situations that were really
pretty bad.
Difficult to handle.
Yes. Yeah. When you see guys fall in front of you, the side of you, the back of you, you wonder what's holding you up sometimes. But it was slow moving, and the casualties were very heavy. And then tell you one of my experiences. It may take me a little while to tell you this, but we was in the Battle of St. Lo, and we'd been pinned down for about 3 days. And so one morning, the flak was pretty heavy, and so went up to see up around to the headquarters and see what was going on and see if there's any bad casualties. So while I was there, while we was being shelled, so I seen a foxhole probably 30 feet from me, and I run and jumped in that foxhole. And I had much more than got in that foxhole, and a man landed on top of me and about knocked the wind out of me. So he said to me, he said, well, he said, we can get up now. I said, no. I said, you just wait, I'll tell you when to get up, because I said there'll be 2 more shelling coming in. And I said, then we'll have about 20 minutes to a half hour, and then be prepared for another shelling. Because when you're in combat, you begin to learn different segments of shelling and one thing or another in combat. So anyway, so then we finally had 2 more shellings, and I said, okay, I said, let's get up and I'll have to go see how much work we got to do. So he got up and brushed himself off, and he said, soldier said, I'm sorry, he said, I jumped in on you. He said, those shells don't have no mercy on some people. And I said, yes, that's right. He said, who are you? And I said, I'm Private Melvin E. Robbins. I said, with the 3rd Headquarters Medical Detachment here. I said, I'm a medical technician. He said, well, he said, I'm glad to know you. Put out his hand, he shook my hand. He said, I'm General Omar Bradley. I said to him, I said, General, I said, what on earth are you doing up here? I said, we never seen anything any bigger than a bird kernel up here. And he said, well, he said, you've been pinned down for 3 days. And he said, my bosses set me up here to get you guys moving again. And he said, I'll see you later. I said, okay, General. I said, I got work to do. So I went on, and so then in about 3 days, we was out of there. But they sent bombers in there, and when we go through that town, there wasn't nothing left. Our Air Force had just loaded off the map. And but his boss happened to be General Eisenhower. So General Eisenhower was wondering why we was bogged down, but he sent his top man up there to get us to go on the move. So I thought that was one of my great experiences of my war, you know.
And you were how old at the time? Just
19
years old? 19
years old, so. But I say that was one of my highlights of my whole Army career. And so then after that, I was taken a prisoner of war, and for about 11 days, 7 to 11 days, something like that. And so then Patton's Third Army finally relieved us and got us back to our outfits, one thing and another. And so then I got wounded, and so then I was taken back to England to the hospital. And then when we got ready to leave Southampton to come back to the States, I and 2 other medical technicians were assigned to take care of this medical ship, the old St. Olaf, which was converted into a hospital ship at that time. And us 3 guys, I and myself and 2 other guys, we took care of 350 people who was on that ship. And so it took us 31 days. If you can imagine a tugboat the size of the Queen Mary, that's what we was on. And we was out there in a storm one day, and we sat there and bobbed up and down like a cork, you know, on a lake someplace. And we didn't move any place. We had some fellows got sick. And one thing, we had one man commit suicide, and he hung himself. And so, but anyway, so we buried him at sea. And but the irony of the thing is when we hit the Charleston, South Carolina, where we debarked from Europe, I and the other 2 guys, they put us in the hospital. The reason why I would say 80% of the men that was on that ship was seasick. But us 3 guys never got seasick. But when we hit solid ground, we couldn't stand up because we were so used to moving and rolling and walking in a 45-degree angle and taking care of everyone else. So they call it land sickness. So it's just reversed. And so, yet today, I believe if I was on the ship someplace, it wouldn't bother me, but it's when to get off. And it's called, they called it, at that time, reverse, they called it land sickness. And so, and we was in a hospital, us 3 guys in a hospital in Charleston, South Carolina, and then they transferred us to Carl General Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, and that's where we got discharged. And the other 2 guys was off that medical ship. And so it took me a good while to get back on my feet. I had to learn how to walk all over again. And eating wasn't no problem, but learning how to stand on your feet and your balance and everything is something else. So then I was discharged from Carl General Hospital, and then they sent me to Camp Atterbury for my mustering out pay, and so then I got my mustering out pay, and so on. But I might say this about some of my medals, which I received during my Army service and combat service, and finally the Decatur County Service Officer Ernie Sturt worked on my case for about 4 years, and it only took about, from the time I was out, it only took about 45 years for me to get my medals from the government.
45 years.
And which I finally got them all. And then my daughter finally was here from over in Pennsylvania, and so she said, Dad, one day, she says, it's time, we're collecting all your medals, and if we can find them, and put them in a case, and that's what she does, she put them in that case, and so that's about where we're at. Do you have any other questions, George?
I was wondering about your 11 days in the German prison camp. Any recollections there that...
Well, I tell you, George, wasn't really in a prison camp.
Okay.
We was captured by the Germans, and we were medical men. We didn't carry rifles, didn't carry guns, so therefore they didn't know what to do with us. And they just moved us from one place to the other, and we had to just scrape and eat whatever we could find. And what soup they give us wasn't worth eating. And but anyway, and so then finally Patton's men did find us. But what they really did, they didn't know what to do with us, so they kept us up on the front lines, put us in an old building, and then they moved us from one place to the other, and then they finally had us in an old chicken house. It was probably as long as these 2 rooms are, stink there, and then they locked us in there. But why they done that is due to the fact they wanted our artillery to bomb them and kill us, have our own men kill us, then they wouldn't have to do it, see. And that's the reason why that's what they kept doing. Kept moving us around and kept us up on the front. Because they wasn't supposed to be killing, you know. I have a lot of stories I could tell, but I'm not, you know, really like to tell some.
Sure.
So, anything else?
Well, my last point here, I might ask you to consider giving just a kind of a general impression of how you felt about the war, in terms of its necessity, the conduct of the war, any particular emotional responses that you had about the war.
Well, I think that they said, well, World War II was going to be the answer to all wars, but I kind of, at that time, I kind of disagreed with them because I figured the Bible said there'd be wars and rumors of wars, and so, which is that. And yet today I have kind of a mix of emotions about World War II, which I think was very appropriate, which we did have World War II. And we was fighting on two fronts. I had a younger brother who was 2 years younger than I, and he fought in the South Pacific against the Japanese people. And I was over in the other theater fighting against the German people. So he didn't like the Japanese people due to the fact it's his war experiences, and I didn't like the German people due to the fact of my experience during the war. But they think that years, 50 or 60 years, you should forget a lot of these things, but no, there's a lot of things that happened that you can't forget what some of the German people done, and and those things stick with you, and but today I still have some remorse against German people. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do have. So.
Well, I'm sure that's probably natural.
Yeah. So. And George would like to explain just as short in detail some of my medals which I received. In the Army, they give you a dog tag to wear on your neck for identification and thing. Also, that tells you in there whether you're a Protestant or a Catholic or whatever religion you are. And also it tells you about when you have your tetanus shots on there. It's your Circle A is the 3rd Army. The TO is the Texas and Oklahoma, which T is Texas, O for Oklahoma. And that's the 90th Division. Here is the medical badge, the infantry medical badge. And if I was in the infantry, it'd be a rifle on there, but since I was in the medical corps, it has the medical insignia. These are 2 European patches, which indicate the European theater which I served in. These are 2 bronze stars awarded to me for valor during combat. This is the Purple Heart, which I received for injuries. This is the Prisoner of War Medal. And these here are campaign medals. This is just a shell I put in here. And then this is my Army plaque. This was a bugler I found and put in there because during basic training, I and 2 other buglers were buglers. I bugled the 3rd week, and every 3rd week I bugled. So. These are pictures here of me when I was 19 years old in the service. These are medical insignias. I think there's one over there too.
Yes.
Yeah. These are medical insignias, George, which I just put in there. And then this is the Army insignia for being in the Army. So, like I say, my daughter finally took a while to gather these all up, and so she made the case and had them put in there for me. So I have this at my house in my shop room, hanging there on it. So people come in and gives them something to look at and talk about.
It's very impressive, isn't it?
Sorry. And
it took you 45 years to get it?
yeah. And I heard here a while back, there's still some people older than that still get their medals. So that they're just a little slow. But I'm going to pass this on someday to my grandson, David. And he's been over in Iraq for 2 terms, and so he's out now. So yeah, so he's out and married and lives in Georgia. So someday I told Rosie and my daughters that my grandson gets this, so he can display it and do something, whatever he wants to do.
Yeah, some of his own.
How'd you get wounded?
Huh?
How were you wounded? When you were wounded, how did you get?
Oh, yeah, I was blowed up.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's the reason why I'm having a hard problem today. Hearing is part of my hearing, and so yeah. Then I picked shrapnel out of my legs 2 years after I was discharged. I talked to a man here a while back, Smith is his name. That's not right, is it, George?
No, I didn't.
From over Clarksburg. Anyway, him and I was at a meeting down here at KSC's not too long ago, and he threw something out there in a plastic, and he said, "What's that, Melvin?" I said, "Well, it looks like something I used to dig out of my legs." He said, "That's right." He said, "I dug it out of my back of my shoulder." He said, "I had a knot back there for years and years and years." He said, finally, he said, he got to the place that was bothering me too bad, and I went to the doctor and cut it out. And he said, "That's what it was, this 6-year shrapnel."
Oh.
And he said, it's been over 60 years.
Well, it's amazing that the casualties in Iraq are, in a large sense, very similar to what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of casualties did you deal with mainly on the landing? Just a lot of
All kinds.
shrapnel and
All kinds.
bullet.
Anyway, from arms blowed off, legs blowed off.
Well, how many medical doctors did you work with? You were
Oh,
assigned
well,
to?
probably at the, see, I worked in the field, and most doctors don't work in the field, but they work back at what we call the first station. And we take the patients out of the field and then send them back, patch them up and everything, and take them back to the first station. And that's where you most generally find the doctors and the nurses.
And you had to be right in the middle of things.
I had
because
to be
that's
right
what
on the front line, right where everything was happening. So I carried the plasma, I carried stethoscopes, so give IVs, tourniquets, cut fingers off, cut hands off. So, all
I
times.
don't know how you could have done that.
Yeah, you get hard.
And of course, there were no sanitary conditions with it.
No. If you had alcohol or you had a bottle of wine or something like that, you poured it on the wounds and went on, passed them out, went on. So
How many lives do you think you might have saved?
I have no
No.
idea. I have no idea. But it's hard. And when I come out, I still had a lot of, nightmares where you couldn't sleep and things. And it took me a long time. I couldn't settle down. Norman Whitcamper and he was over there about the same time I was. He did the same thing I did. Only he was with different outfit. Paul Herbert was another, and Frank Brandcap was another from here. Us boys all in the medical service. So, and but very fortunate those fellas come back. So. But yeah.
Well, it seems like we don't learn a lot of things, do
No,
we?
we don't.
They don't stick with us.
No. I wouldn't take $1 million for my experience, and I wouldn't give $1 million to have another. So.
Good point.